Okay, we're going to go over the 9.3 notes where we're going to be solving rational equations. So first of all, we have to remind ourselves of extraneous solutions. It's basically a solution that emerges from the process of solving but is not a valid solution. So let's go ahead and check to see if we get solutions that actually don't work. We're going to be looking at those excluded values that we had and see if that ends up being one of them. And if it is, we will cross it off and it will not be part of the solution. All right, how do you determine whether an x value is a solution of this equation? We're going to plug that in. So let's plug in the -1 in for that x and see if it's actually a valid solution. So -1 divided by 2 times, and -1 is what we're plugging in for that x, plus 1. And does that equal 5 divided by 4 minus, and then the x is -1. Remember, when you subtract a negative, it's really adding that we're going to have to do there. So we have -1 divided by 2 times -1 is -2 plus 1. Here we have 5 divided by 4 plus 1, which is 5. Let's simplify this a little more. -1 divided by -2 plus 1, that's -1. This is 1. And yes, -1 divided by -1 is 1. And since 1 equals 1, yes, it is a solution. So let's always check. All right, let's go ahead and go down to the next part to find the zeros. To find the zeros, basically we're going to set this equation equal to 0. Now when we make this equal 0 and solve, we're not even looking at the f of x anymore, we can actually think about this as cross multiplying. It's really 0 over 1. And if you cross multiply, this top multiplied by 1 is itself, and that's going to equal 4x times, or 4x plus 1 times 0, which is really 0. So all you're really looking at is the numerator. 2x to the 4th power plus 16x to the 3rd plus 24x squared equals 0, because 4x plus 1 times 0 is 0. All right, from there, let's factor out a GCF. We can factor out a 2x squared out of all of this. That leaves you with x squared plus 8x plus 12. All right, let's go ahead and factor that a little bit more. Two things that multiply to get 12 is basically 2 and 6, and they're both going to be positive. All right, let's split these up and make it equal to 0. So 2x squared equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, and x plus 6 equals 0. Here, x is going to be 0, x equals, subtract the 2, and here, subtract the 6. Keep in mind this is worth 2 values, right, when we use the fundamental counting principle there of algebra. Since it's to the 4th power, technically you have 4 solutions. This is worth 2, 3, and 4. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at solving now. To solve rational equations, first we're going to identify what is that LCD. And we're going to multiply both sides of the equation by that LCD. What will happen is it'll fraction bust or bomb. Basically gets rid of all the fractions. Whatever's left is going to be an equation there, and we'll just solve that resulting equation. Don't forget, we'll check for extraneous solutions. So let's go ahead and take this first one here. These denominators are not exactly the same. 4 minus x is not the same thing as x minus 4. X is negative here where it's positive there, and the 4 is positive here where that's negative there. One way you can actually get them to be the same denominator is to factor one of these out, -1. So if you factor out a -1, the 4 becomes negative, and the x becomes positive. And notice that's the same now. So let's go ahead and figure out our LCD. Well, our LCD is basically the -1 times the x minus 4, because x minus 4 is already there. Technically, you don't need to write the -1. You could just write minus or that negative in front, but I like that -1 just so you can visually see it, so when we cancel, we see it's still there. All right, and I'm going to multiply both sides of this equation by this LCD. So I'll multiply this whole side by this -1 times the x minus 4. I'll multiply this side by the -1 times the x minus 4. All right, we're going to go ahead and cancel. You can multiply both sides of an equation by the same thing, and it'll still be equal. So -1 and the x minus 4 both cancel, so really the only thing that's left is this 2x. Over here, then x minus 4 cancels, but the -1 is still left. So -1 times x squared is -x squared. All right, let's move it all to one side of the equal sign. I'm going to move this -x squared to the other side since we want this to be positive. So it's going to be a positive x squared on this side plus 2x. And then let's factor out a GCF, which is x. All right, and from here, split set, see what you get. And then this right here is fine. This where you have to subtract 2. And before you box your answer, let's check for extraneous solutions. Really, if you want to, you can even figure out what the extraneous solution is from the beginning, from the LCD. We don't want the denominator to ever be 0. And if this LCD is 0, that will not work. And the only excluded value here is x when it's 4. 4 minus 4 would make 0. So since the excluded value is 4 and neither one of the answers is 4, these are valid answers. Now, if 4 does show up, we'd have to cross it off and not include that in our answer. All right, let's take a look at this next one. Okay, we have x, 5, and 10. There's no factoring in the denominator, so we're ready to go for the LCD. So let's just look at the numbers first. We have 5 and 10. 5 and 10 can both go into 10, and you still need that x. That's my LCD. All right, let's look at excluded values. If I make this equal 0, the only excluded value would be 0. That would make the denominator 0. So if we get 0 in the answer, we cannot use that. All right, let's go ahead and multiply through by the LCD. So our LCD is 10x. Multiply everything on the left side by 10x, everything on the right side by 10x. And multiplying both sides of an equation by the same thing does not change the values, because as long as we do what's on the left side to the right side, we're still equal. Now 10x is going to be distributed to both of these terms because we have that minus sign. So actually I'm going to just separate this and write 10x again here so we can multiply 10x by both. All right, let's go ahead and cancel. The x cancels here, but you're left with 10 still there, and 10 times 6 is 60. Over here, 5 goes into 10 2 times. So we have a 7x times 2x, and that's going to be 14x squared. Here, a 10 cancels, and then we have x times x, which is x squared. Excuse me. Since I have x squared and x squared, I'm going to move this to the other side so we can add those like terms together. So I'd add 14 over plus the 1 makes 15. I'm just getting x squared by itself, so I'm going to go ahead and divide both sides by 15. And that gets me 4. And then to get rid of the square, we take the square root. And don't forget the square root rule where you have to write plus or minus. The square root of 4 is 2, so plus or minus 2 equals x. And before we box our answer, let's check, is any one of those an excluded value? No. So plus or minus 2 is the answer, positive 2 and negative 2, because 0 did not show up. All right, let's take a look at the next one. All right, before we start finding the LCD, you have to factor the denominator, and I can factor a 2 out of this second one here. 2 factored out gets you x plus 4. I notice I have an x plus 4 there, so actually this is my LCD. It's 2 times the x plus 4. All right, let's go ahead and do the excluded value here. The only number that would make this 0 is negative 4. So if negative 4 shows up in the answer, we have to exclude that value and cross it off. All right, let's go ahead and multiply everything through by the LCD. So my LCD is 2 times x plus 4. So I'm multiplying everything on this left side by 2 times x minus 4. Everything on the right side, oh, I meant plus 4, sorry. And over here, 2 times x plus 4. So notice there's 2 terms here, so you distribute, which means I multiply each one of these by the 2 times x plus 4. All right, time to cancel. So x plus 4 is cancel. I still have the 2 there, so 2 times 2 is 4 times the x plus 7. Over here, nothing cancels. So I'm going to have to multiply this out. 2 times 2 is 4, and I have an x plus 4. All right, that equal sign, 2's cancel, and the x plus 4 is cancel. So everything cancels, and so we're just left with the numerator, 2x plus 20. All right, let's go ahead and distribute. 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 7 is 28. Negative 4 times x is negative 4x. Negative 4 times 4 is negative 16. Let's add our like terms together. 4x minus 4x, that actually cancels itself out there. 28 minus 16 is a total of 12. And we're just trying to get x by itself, so we're going to subtract the 20. And that gets us negative 8 equals 2x, and then divide both sides by 2. So we got negative 4 equals x. Now before we box our answer, let's check. Oh wait, negative 4 is the excluded value. Negative 4 cannot be a solution because if you have that, negative 4 plus 4 would make a 0 in the denominator. We cannot have that happen. So if that's an excluded value, then there's actually no solution here. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this next one. All right, the denominators, there's nothing to cancel, or something to factor, so the LCD is basically the 2 and that x minus 7. What's the excluded value? The excluded value is going to be 7. That would make the denominator 0, so make sure 7 is not part of the solution. All right, let's multiply through by the LCD, which is 2 times x minus 7. I'm going to go ahead and just start writing it for every term. All right, let's cancel what we have here is an x minus 7. We still have the 2 left, which is 2x minus 9, plus the 2's cancel here. We have an x still left, and the x minus 7. Here, the x minus 7 cancels, so we just have the 2 times the 5, which is 10. All right, let's go ahead and distribute the 2. 2 times 2x is 4x. 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. X times x is x squared. X times negative 7 is negative 7x. Let's add our like terms together and then get it in the right order. I want x squared to be first. And then 4x minus 7x is negative 3x minus 18. Don't forget we have to move everything to one side of the equal sign before we can actually factor. So I'm going to move that 10 over by subtracting it. And then two things that multiply to get 28 is 7 and 4, and we'll need a negative 7 to make a negative 3 out of this. Split these up, make them each equal to 0. So we'll add 7 here and subtract 4 there. Before we box our answer, let's check. 7 is an excluded value, and that showed up. So we're going to have to cross that off, and the only answer here is negative 4 then. Let's go to the back side. And on the back side, it's same type of problem, but this time we're going to have to factor this first. So this factors to x minus 7 times x minus 3. So let's go ahead and look at our LCD. Basically, we have x minus 7 times x minus 3. Those are the only factors that show up. So it's x minus 7 times x minus 3. Keep in mind that excluded values for this will be 7 and 3. Make sure those don't show up. If they do, we'll have to cross that off. So let's go ahead and multiply every term by this x minus 7 times x minus 3. That's a 3. All right, let's cancel. So x minus 7 and x minus 3 both cancel here, so we're just left with the numerator of x squared minus 29. If you pick the right LCD, the denominator should always cancel out. X minus 7 cancels, you still have the 5 and this x minus 3. Here, the x minus 3 cancels, and you're left with the 5 and the x minus 7. So distribute here. We'll have 5 times x and 5 times negative 3. 5 times x, and 5 times negative 7. Let's add our like terms together. So 5x and 5x is 10x, negative 15 and negative 35 is negative 50. Let's go ahead and move it all to one side of the equal sign. So I'm going to move it all to the left side since x squared is positive here. I'll move the 10 over by subtracting it, 10x, and then I'll have to add the 50, and that gets you 21. Factor this. Two things that multiply to get 21 is 7 and 3. They both have to be negative to get a negative 10. Oops, negative 10. And then we're going to go ahead and split those up, make them equal 0. We get x equals 7 and x equals 3. Well, looking at our excluded values, 7 and 3 are not valid solutions. So actually both do not work, so the answer is no solution. Let's try this next one right here. So here we have factor out GCF in the first term here. So we're going to factor out the 2, which leaves me with x plus 3. Let's look at an LCD. I have a 2 and a 6, so 2 and 6 both go into 6. I have an x plus 3, and I have an x plus 5. All right, let's write our excluded values here. So excluded values is the -3 and the -5. 6, remember, that doesn't get you excluded value, doesn't have an x there. So let's go ahead and multiply it through by this LCD. So 6 times x plus 3 and x plus 5. This one, 6 times x plus 3 times x plus 5. And this last one, 6x plus 3 and x plus 5. I know it's really hard to see. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cancel. So 2 goes into 6 3 times. X plus 3 cancels, so you have a 3 times the 5. That's the 15, and you still have the x plus 3. I'm sorry, x plus 5, I meant to say. X plus 3 is canceled. All right, here we have 6 that cancels. And then you still have this x plus 3 and x plus 5. And this last one, the x plus 5 cancels. We have a 2 times the 6, which is 12, and you still have the x plus 3. All right, we're going to have to multiply this all out before we can solve. So distribute the 15, we get 15x plus 75. Here we're going to have to FOIL that out, and keep in mind that this negative will have to be distributed to it afterwards. So x times x is x squared. We have a 5x and a 3x, which make 8x, and 3 times 5 is 15. Distribute the 12, 12x plus 36. Again, this is probably the biggest mistake, is people forget to distribute the negative, and then they just make the first one negative. So just be careful with that. So distribute the negative makes it a minus x squared, a minus 8x, and a minus 15. If you are not getting your answers on your homework, make sure you check if you distribute a negative. All right, add our like terms together. I have a negative x squared. I'm starting with the highest power. 15 minus 8 is 7x. And then 75 minus the 15 is 60. I'm going to move it all to one side, the equal sign. Since x squared is negative here, I'm going to move it all to the right side. So if I move this over to the right, it will be a positive x squared. Moving this over to right, you're subtracting the 7x, which makes a 5x. And I'm going to subtract the 60 to the other side, which makes it a negative 24. Let's factor 2 things that multiply to get 24. There's a lot of them. The one that will get us the 5 is the 8 and the 3. Positive 5 means positive 8 and a negative 3. Let's go ahead and split these up and make these equal 0. So we get x equals negative 8 and x equals 3. Before we box our answer, let's look at the excluded values. Negative 8 and 3 are both great because negative 3 and negative 5 are the only ones that work, and these are fine. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this last one. You should try this one on your own and pause it and then see if you get the right answer at the very end. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to try it. And let's go ahead and factor this bottom. Here we have an x plus 2 and an x plus 1. Here we have an x plus 2 and an x minus 4. This last one will be an x minus 4 and an x plus 1. All right, let's figure out the LCD. So we have an x plus 2. We have an x plus 1. That already has the x plus 2, but it's missing the x minus 4. This has x minus 4 and the x plus 1, so actually that's my LCD. So our excluded values are negative 2, negative 1, and positive 4. So we'll make sure we don't get those in our final solution. All right, let's multiply everything through by this LCD. So looking at this first one right here, We have a x plus 2, an x plus 1, and an x minus 4. Here we have an x plus 2, x plus 1, and x minus 4. And this last one, multiplied by x plus 2, x plus 1, and x minus 4. It's really small to see. Let's go ahead and cancel. X plus 2 and x plus 1 cancel, so I still have the x minus 4. So 2 times x minus 4. Here we have x plus 2, x minus 4, so I still have the x plus 1. 9 times the x plus 1. Here the x plus 4, or sorry, x minus 4, x plus 1 cancels, so you still have the x plus 2. All right, let's go ahead and distribute. We get a 2x minus 8, distribute here, we get a 9x plus 9, and distribute here, we get a 4x plus 8. Let's add our like terms here. So 9 and 2 is 11x, negative 8 plus 9 is 1. Let's get our x's on one side of the equal sign. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract the 4x. So you got 7x plus 1 equals 8. Let's go ahead and move this 1 to the other side by subtracting. We get a 7x equals 7. Last step, divide by 7. And we get x equals 1. Now, let's see, is 1 one of the valid solutions? Yeah, it's a valid solution. It's not one of the excluded values. And so that's it. All right, let's go ahead and do some word problems here. So the first one is, a person is kayaking on a river. It takes them a total of 6 hours, to travel 5 miles upstream and 5 miles downstream. In still water, a person can travel at a speed of 3 miles per hour, and that's in still water. What's the speed of the current of the river? In order to do this problem, you actually have to know that distance equals rate times time. We're actually going to solve this equation for time. So I'm going to write this here. D equals RT, rate times time. To solve this equation for t and to get t by itself, I would have to divide both sides by r. So really, time is distance divided by rate. That's what I'm going to use here. This is my distance, this is my rate, and to get my time, it's basically the distance over the rate. So we'll be dividing this in this last column. This just helps to organize your thoughts. We're going to let C represent the speed of the current, C kind of for current there, in miles per hour. All right, let's go ahead and take a look. How far did we go? Well, if you look at upstream, we went 5 miles upstream, so that's going to be 5. And we went 5 miles downstream, so that's also a distance of 5. So we went the same distance going upstream and downstream. Here's the part that's tricky. It's the speed. The speed is actually, we have it in still water, 3 miles per hour. But if you have a current and you're going upstream, you're going to actually go slower because you're going against the current. Whereas downstream, you're going to go faster because you're going with the current. So we have to take that into consideration. Still water is 3, but you're going to have to subtract the current because going against you upstream. Your speed is 3, but when you're going downstream, you're going with the current, so it's going to push you along to go faster. All right, let's go ahead and do the time. So it's basically distance divided by rate. 5 over 3 minus c. Here, distance 5 over 3 plus c because of downstream. All right, the total time. This is the time it took to go upstream. This is the time it took to go downstream. But we had a total of 6 hours for this whole travel time. So this time plus this time should equal a total of 6. So that's our setup. We have 5 over 3 minus c plus 5 over 3 plus c, and that should equal a total of 6 hours together. So that's the setup. Time upstream plus time downstream equals the total time for the whole trip. All right, now we're going back to getting our LCD. So our LCD this time is 3 minus c times 3 plus c, because these are not the same thing, right? All right, let's multiply through by the LCD. So multiply this by the 3 minus c times the 3 plus c. Multiply this by 3 minus c times 3 plus c. And this last one by 3 minus c and 3 plus c. This is the part that a lot of people mess up on. They forget to multiply this 6 by the same thing. Remember, you have to multiply all terms by it. 3 minus c's cancel here, so you have a 5 left with the 3 plus c. Here the 3 plus c cancels, so you're left with the 5 times 3 minus c. And here nothing cancels, so you're just going to have the 6 times 3 minus c times 3 plus c, because nothing cancels there. All right, and let's go ahead and solve, distribute. We get 15 plus 5c. Distribute here, we get 15 minus 5c. And then here I'm going to multiply these together because they're difference of squares, 3 times 3, and then negative c times negative c. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add my like terms together. The 5c's cancel, 5 minus 5, right? 15 plus 15 is 30. And then I'm going to distribute here, which gets me a total of 54 minus 6c squared. Move the 54 to the other side would get me a negative 24. Get rid of this negative 6 by dividing both sides by negative 6. We get 4. To get rid of the square, we take the square root. And normally we write plus or minus, but if we're talking about the rate of the current, we are actually not going to use negative. Speed is not negative. So we're going to just take the square root of 4, which is 2, and the current is in miles per hour. Just a minute. Okay, let's begin this last one. Ben can clean a large aquarium tank in about 7 hours. Where Ben and Lori work together, they can clean the tank in 4 hours. Write and solve a rational equation to determine how long to the nearest tenth of an hour it would take Lori to clean the tank if she works by herself. So we're going to let T represent the time in hours Lori takes to clean the tank. So let's look at the work rate. If you think about the work rate, it's basically how much work can they do per hour. How much can they do per hour? So Ben, if he can clean one full tank in about 7 hours, how much of the tank can he actually clean in 1 hour? So if he can clean the tank in 7 hours, he can clean, the rate is basically going to be in 1 hour. So he basically can do 1/7 of the work in 1 hour. If it takes 7 hours, he does 1/7 of it in that 1 hour. All right, time for Lori. Well, Lori, we don't know how long it takes, so it's going to be one job in I don't know how many hours. One job in I don't know how many hours per hour. Now, they're both going to work together, and they can actually complete the job in 4 hours. So 4 and 4 is the amount of time that each one is going to be spent working. And then to find how much work is completed, basically, you're multiplying this. The work rate times however much time they spend is going to equal how much work they completed. So if Ben can do 1/7 of the job in 1 hour and he spends 4 hours, he can do 4/7 of the job in those 4 hours. I'm multiplying these together. Lori, we don't know how much her work rate is, but however many hours it takes her to do this, it's one job out of those many hours, times the 4 hours will be 4 over T. And remember that you're going to have this much work completed plus this much work completed will equal one full job. So let's go ahead and write that out as an equation. So we have 4/7 plus 4 over T equals one full job. Our LCD is 7 and T, so 7T. So let's go ahead and multiply through by this 7T. So what's going to happen is the 7 cancels here, which leaves us with T times the 4. Here the T cancels, which leaves the 7 times the 4. And 1 times 7T is 7T. Let's move the 4T to the other side, which gets us 3T. Divide both sides by 3. And we have to get this to the nearest, nearest tenth of an hour. So if you divide this in the calculator to the nearest tenth, you get 9.3 hours. And that's how much time it's going to take Lori to complete this job by herself. Okay. And that's it. Remember, your homework is on my HRW.